it's just all that Mercury in Gemini. I'm like, I need all the most happening.
I just started doing that work, and I have to say that it's like such a wonderful thing.
It's exceptional. I can see all of these things. And
I
it
now have
really
to get a
makes me
second one
happy.
here. I now have to get one here at home because I just realized, like,
All
yeah,
that
that's
Mercury in
necessary.
Gemini. Yes, absolutely. I live and die by it. I've got 3 of them actually. So, hello, everybody, and welcome back to the YouTube Astrology Academy. This is so cool. If you are new here, first of all, welcome. Dig in, sit down. We're going to do some Q&A today with Michael Bartlett, which welcome back.
Thank you. Great to be back.
Yeah, your classes, you did Mercury for us last year and then retrograde planets. And yeah, did you enjoy it?
It was so much fun. I think teaching is such a great opportunity to deepen learning things. So I love dipping into that a lot. And Erin Sullivan's book on the retrograde planets is so amazing. And I was telling her that I was sharing her work on it, and she just, she has just such great work. So it's so fun to be able to review it again because it's such a huge topic.
Mm-hmm. Oh, and we've got some good questions. Our tribe came up with great questions today. There was one question where I was like, I didn't even think about that. So there's like a lot to be able to explore. But welcome back. Pleasure to have you. If you are new to the YouTube Academy or you are following me just on the page and you happen to pop in because we're doing it live today, we have got an entire playlist of classes, astrology classes from the ground up. We started the history of Western astrology and we have moved all the way through to compatibility astrology or synastry. So there is a lot to dig in, and they're not just what do we think about astrology videos, they are skills and techniques that you can take, grab your chart and start to let the language of astrology be translated for you and learn with us. So I invite you, I welcome you. If you are coming back, thank you for your questions. You guys put questions all over the place and I ran around the internet scouring them back up, and I appreciate you being so inquisitive about what we're going to be talking about today. So thank you guys so much. If you have more questions as we go along for about the next 30 minutes or so, feel free to pop them down in the chat. So Michael, first of all, you've got that big old like Kepler sign back there. What are you doing these days?
Well, I have been tasked with the position of president of Kepler College for the next year or so. So we'll see how it goes. We're in a big transition period. We just got our new website launched and working on, just trying to find the best possible way to give everyone out there what they need and make Kepler College shiny and happy and connecting with everyone like you. The work we do with you, which is really great, and the work you do with us is really wonderful, and just really wanting to kind of get us into the 21st century.
Oh, brilliant. And can you tell us just quickly, what's kind of the history of Kepler? Because we have a lot of new students who didn't know Kepler was a thing at all.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so Kepler's been around for a good 30 years at this point. Was actually an accredited college for a time period where we're actually giving bachelor's degrees for a bit. Then someone got a little concerned because they were like, well, how can astrology be fitting into this? And so we unfortunately got that lost. So we've been kind of like doing this very interesting thing of still attacking astrology from an academic standpoint, meaning that our courses are really robust. When you take our fundamentals course, you are going to know every single thing you need to know about astrology from the ground up. You're kind of, many people who are out there who call themselves experts would learn a lot, including myself, from those classes. I mean, it's really quite amazing, like what it covers. So we have our diploma programs, which give people the nice width and breadth of astrological education. And then we also have special certificate programs like in mundane, in counseling and therapy, in astrocartography, Vedic, really, pretty much everything. And we like working with teachers from around the world. So it gives a nice round viewpoint. You did something very different. A lot of people who start their own astrology schools, they're the only person. So everyone's really only getting that one perspective, but the beauty of all of us have a viewpoint, and it's great when we all share our viewpoints because everyone can pick and choose what it is that works. Many voices give us a lot more, and it's so much more Aquarian, of course.
Yeah, well, Saturn in Aquarius, here it is. I think everybody's kind of coming back around to really make astrology not only accessible, but really that width, like you said, that there's a lot, there's a space for you if you want to practice, and there's also really good depth available as well.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
I mean, I love what you're doing, because you're getting, you're helping so many people understand things and getting such a great opportunity for people to get some good width and breadth of understanding of astrology free, which is really great. And through your fundraising and everything, it's really wonderful. And then if people are interested in doing a little more in-depth work, Kepler College is always welcoming that. We check out our webinars, our workshops, our courses, a lot of fun stuff being available.
Yeah, absolutely. So you guys, you can see the link, or you can see the website on Michael's screen, but I will also make sure that I put it in the description box down below. And I will actually be coming to do an interpretation class for you guys later in the fall. So we're given and taken here. It's really very good.
Has to be awesome, right?
Yeah, it totally is. And it's nice because I do think that we're seeing truly the Saturn and Aquarius where we're not such solo practitioners anymore. So it's really kind of nice to have this coming together and rounding, I'm a big fan right now.
Thank you. Really appreciate that.
Awesome. So should we jump into some questions and go for it?
Okay.
All right, let's do it. So I thought that this was an interesting question to get started with, but a person was asking, can you tell me about a planet that is stationing or just about to go retrograde? And that it's a good question.
Well, and also what's really great about that question is it actually shows up the flip side. So the planet not only stations retrograde, it stations direct on the other side. So the metaphor I like to really use for this position is if you think of like us being an LP, an old acrylic, or vinyl, acrylic, vinyl record, playing there. And the needle is it's either the speed is slowing down or it just gets caught in that groove. Stationing is just that. Stationing means it's like coming to a stop. So like when you're in a train and you're coming to the train's going, and it's going to stop, it just, you're there. So when a planet is stationing retrograde or direct, it tends to take a lot longer. When you look in your ephemeris, which is that book that shows all the movements of the planets by day, you'll notice that when the planets are starting to station, that the degrees start slowing. They're not moving at their regular speed. And so what I like to think of is that, it's just like in life in other ways, when we're starting to slow down, we notice things a little bit more. Things get presented. So it's like one of those things like, okay, what's happening? And I'm really aware of it personally. And this is where I think astrology is so helpful, because most of us come to a lot of this stuff because we have personal things here. Mm-hmm. I have a Mars that 3 days after I was born went retrograde. So it was stationing retrograde as born. So I'm like a poster child for that. And it's interesting because when it happens when you're born and it's that, so when you look at that, it actually by transit and progression will move into that retrograde state sooner rather than later. So even though you're having that feeling of it being, quote, stationing, you're really kind of what's called, sometimes people will say you're in the shadow. Right. I don't know if you've ever heard that time before, like, oh, we're in the shadow of Mercury going retrograde. And what that means is when Mercury starts to slow down, say Mercury starts to slow down and go retrograde or goes stationing retrograde at 15 degrees of a sign. So that means that later on, when it goes all the way back it needs to, and it starts going forward, it's going to go forward probably at a number lower than 15. And so it's still technically in the shadow until it gets that 15 degrees. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
that's
it does.
Another one that's people do. Yeah. But I think that's such a great question about that, because it's so important about the stationing retrograde and stationing direct. You'll just notice there's like a feeling, things just kind of, like usually when Mercury starts doing that, people are going like, something's up, you kind of can tell that something's going on.
Right. And we're going to be moving here. What date is it? We're going to move into Mercury's pre-retrograde shadow time here just on the 20th. So we're just a couple days ahead of that. So this is a great question to start taking note. At 24 degrees of Virgo, what's going on? You're slowing down in that train. What are you starting to take note of?
Yeah. And especially if you have planets at that point, you're going to really feel that. And actually, if it's okay, I'd like to, one of the other questions I thought was so great on this is like, what is it like with people when they had those retrograde planets in there in that period. And I think that's just like a nice segue for this one, if that's okay.
Yeah, let's get it.
Because I have a couple of friends who have Mercury retrogrades in their chart, and they feel very much at peace typically when Mercury is retrograde as well, because they have
Right.
that in their chart. So there's just that kind of a sense of it. Most people have a good 30 to 40%. That's kind of like the average. I mean, most of the outer planets spend about 6 months out of the year in a retrograde position. So chances are you're going to have a retrograde somewhere in there. If you don't, that means kind of like you're on all the time.
I know, right? You should enjoy the retrograde period because you get an off point for a minute.
Exactly. And also I would think that for those people who have a full, like where all their planets are direct, when planets are retrograde, they maybe even feel it even more because they're probably not used to that sort of a thing, where most of us are kind of like, because I don't know, I kind of like to think of it as almost like the gas pedal in a sense. It's like some of us are moving really super fast, some of us are a little like slowing down. And so we're all kind of modulating based on our number of retrograde planets and forward. So it's like, my sense is that for people who have like full on direct planets, I would think that when big planets and Mercury goes retrograde, that they probably feel a little bit more.
Yeah, I think so too. And I notice the people around me who have Mercury retrograde natally, when Mercury stations retrograde in the sky, they don't get to sit at home and like think about things anymore. They are like called out, and I'm like, oh, busy season for you. Thank God, because the rest of us are sitting down,
Finally getting a little bit of time off, right?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
And they also, sorry, but just those people also have your friends who have Mercury retrograde, don't you find like there's just a different way that they relate to time and space and appointments and it can be very frustrating, but also very enlightening.
Right, because they're just not in the same groove. And I have Mercury in Gemini, so I'm done when I start. You know what I mean? So that is already a whole bag of beans for me.
But wasn't it a great gift for you when you got to see like that friend of yours who like drives you crazy because they never show up on time? They're like in 7, you're like, oh, you have a natal Mercury retrograde. Okay, I get it.
Yeah, and it really does. It does exactly that thing, right? I think knowing the astrology of ourselves and the people around us lends itself to a natural compassion for what's going on. I really feel like it helps us support each other's journey better, where it's like, yeah, no, you're not actually inconsiderate. Your journey needs to move at this speed, right? Or in this way, right?
Exactly.
So we have a lot of light bulb moments available.
Yes, definitely.
Which you actually already answered one of our last questions we had, which is what happens when you have 7 planets retrograde in your birth chart?
Yeah, I would think you're really kind of on. And then, but I would think it would also be very powerful is looking at your progressions and seeing when any of your planets are going to be going retrograde, because that's going to be really significant.
Yeah. Well, and I don't think it's that, like you said, the planets are retrograde for like 6 months. So it's not too uncommon. And if you're in a high retrograde year, like we had this year with both Venus and Mars stepping into that retrograde as well, it is definitely possible. Right. And I've got, I don't know, I think 5 retrograde planets and I'm all right.
And I think, it's funny because a lot of the questions were along that line, I think, of like, what happens if, and I think like so many things in astrology are basically repetitions of other parts. And so like if you have a chart that most of your planets are below the horizon, meaning underneath your ascendant descendant line, you're going to be very subjective. If you have a lot of retrograde planets, you're going to be very subjective. It's these things that kind of just vary, meaning subjective, meaning you're going to be filtering things for yourself. You aren't, as a retrograde person, you're not getting that information from out there. You're gathering it and hearing about it out there, but you are the filter that is going to decide what you take away from that.
Yeah, and that can intensify if you've got retrograde planets and they're conjunct. It still acts as a conjunction, but you really are. You're going to be running that filter through. What do I think? How do I feel? What are my experiences? But it's the intensity of the combination of the planets in retrograde. Do you agree?
Exactly. And I think one of the questions is what happens when you have an outer planet retrograde, a personal planet, And they were saying, you know what, and some of these actually get into a little more almost like a personal reading in a sense, because as you and I know, there are so many mitigating factors.
Yes.
So, but what I would say generally is yes, is when you have a large outer planet in conjunct with or right next to one of your personal planets, the first thing I'd want to do is like check for the rulership. If any of those larger planets rule that sign, then that for sure is going to make a big difference. Secondarily, if it's Saturn, that's always going to be making an imprint. But it's that thing of almost like where we talk about combust or cazimi. It's like, you know, that little planet compared, you know, when you put Venus in front of like, you know, the sun, or in front of Jupiter, or in front of Uranus or Neptune, it's like, it's just like smaller than one of their moons. So it's just like, yeah, chances are that larger planet's going to be playing a really big role for you.
And so a question from the chat that I think this goes right into is, what does it mean when the ascendant ruler of your chart is retrograde? What's the impact? These are good questions.
Those are I love those questions. So again, well, first of all, I would say that that's going to give a little more of that subjective flavor to that planet and to that sign. And I'm sorry, it's the ruler of it's the ruler of, that's right. So as a ruler of it, I mean, your ascendant's your ascendant. So you're going to shine out as your ascendant. But if your ruler is in another sign, it's going to depend on what the aspect is to it as well. So that's going to flavor it. So I wouldn't necessarily say first of all, I would never say it's a bad thing. Ever,
right.
ever,
oh, no.
ever. I would never say it's debilitating. I'd never say it's a problem. If anything, it's just one of those things where it's really more for you as an individual to find out what your truth is in relationship to that, and be more subjective, and to take your time. And again, the important thing is by transit, you know, or actually by progression, when does that planet go direct for you? Because that's going to be a huge, huge, huge point of change in your life. Whenever I look at people's natal retrograde planets, I like to look at when their planets are going to be going direct by progression. And by progression, it's just like if you look at an ephemeris and you look down from when you were born, and you see the planets and you see the grade in thing for a retrograde, you want to look down to where it's no longer gray, and it'll show that's where that clear is. And then if you think of each of those days as a year, you can kind of roughly consider how many years you have of that planet being retrograde in your life.
Yeah. And isn't that nice work? Because, you know, we ask this question, or we get asked the question, okay, but like, how long is this going to last? Right. And
always.
It's like, okay, well, I know, right. You're like, so the growth always, but right. Also you get this, this whole other thing over here, which is, you know,
that's the beauty of astrology. I mean, because the truth is, yeah, as human beings, we want to know, like, how long is this torment going to last? And astrology lets us know, like, you know, chances are you can be out of the hospital by this point.
Right. It's like a little diagnosis. But that is okay. We've got two questions, but one was a great question. Somebody asked, if I have a planet that is debilitated and retrograde, what's the impact of that?
So by debilitated, I would say that that's a consideration of fall or detriment. Is that what I'm understanding by them saying debilitated? Okay. So fall and detriment, just to be clear for people, because hello, I have a Aquarius sun and a Scorpio moon. So hello, those are both debilitated. What they really mean is when you think of something like horary, where you need yes and no answers, they're really helpful. And also from an esoteric standpoint, what I tend to find out is that when we have detriment and fall planets, it's opportunities for the soul to resolve issues from the personality. So it's really more of that thing. I call them, it's one of those things where you know the person's going to have to deal with it. You don't get luxury in that area. It's probably what I would say. You don't get away with the things maybe other people would if they had, you know, like a sun in Leo individual is going to get away with a lot more than a sun in Aquarius, because we're just going to be called weird.
Right. Like, and you're going to do it likely like in public, but being all by yourself. Like it's a really interesting like dynamic, right?
Exactly. So then when it's retrograde and it's debilitated, I just think that gives you more of an opportunity. I think my sense is I would say that gives you even more of an opportunity to make that really your own, because it's so personal.
Yeah, it really is, because you're going to need to work that combination out, right?
Like Brittany says, you better work.
You better
Want that
work.
Lamborghini? You better work.
You better work. So here's another great question. If I have a Mars retrograde, but it's at 0 degrees,
I love that one. Yes.
isn't that a good question? So does it have more of the emphasis of Gemini, Mars in Gemini, or Mars in Taurus? That's a good
Beautiful.
question too.
I love that. I love that. So typically I like to think of that 29 degree of the previous sign as kind of having a little bit of a like, it has like its back in the sign, so it knows what all that feels like. And then it's like kind of like walking up and looking off into the distance and gets the feeling of that next sign. So Taurus is on my back and I can view into Gemini, which actually probably is very liberating. But then when you know you have to go back into it, then it's like, oh, I guess I don't get to have the freedom. So and then also on that 0 degree, that first degree in that next sign, it has a little more of a vision about what's going forward, but it really understands that Taurus coming backwards. So I would say that it's going to have a if kind of thinking about to kind of keep it simple, that chances are that Mars is going to be dressed up in a lot of Taurus clothing, but it's going to have a Gemini scarf.
Yeah, right. Like it's like, I know how to Taurus very well, but I'm learning to Gemini.
Right.
So you might see more of the Tauran qualities out front at first.
Exactly. And that Mars that is going to be more determined in Taurus is going to get a little more squirrely in Gemini, but it might not have the gracefulness that Mars would have at 28 degrees of Gemini. So it's like, think of it as like it's in Gemini training, early training, but it has Taurus down. So it's more likely to have its no really good, but it might not be good at saying maybe or let's check it out.
Yeah. Yeah. I have this vision of just like your Mars used to being like nice and steady and persistent. And I figured out how to hold it down and I got it. And you are launched into like a call center. You're like, oh my God, I got to be answering all of this.
And what does that even mean? I don't know what that means.
Right. Whose phone is this? Do we even have landlines anymore?
Right.
It's like that.
Yeah, or like, an example of that would be the Taurus Mars coming in and trying to pick up, or no, the Gemini Mars coming in and trying to pick up an antique phone and going like, have you seen those YouTube videos where they get like 10-year-olds, like give them one of the old rotary dials and like, what am I supposed to do with this?
Yes. It's that Gemini energy being like, I'm about to take you to an upgrade. Okay. I assure you, we're going to an upgrade. Okay. So a question from the chat is, can you talk about Chiron being retrograde?
Yeah, so Chiron being retrograde, I have to admit, I did not put the time. I usually actually include Gemini. I apologize for not including it. The one thing I couldn't find like a set retrograde period. Chiron has an elliptic orbit. So it has like longer times it spends in some signs and shorter in others. So its retrograde periods are also very different. But again, with Chiron going retrograde, I find that's like such a great opportunity of really delving into what one needs to learn to become the teacher, educator, facilitator for the future. Like what, and I also think the feelings are going to be a little more subjective, the ways in which there is the wounding, especially I find in the water signs, there tends to be even more of a greater sensitivity, and the earth signs. The air and fire can kind of get around it because it's a little bit more mobile and motive. But the retrograde cycle will be a lot more about experiencing things and being probably forced into situations where you have to deal with things. So like say like a retrograde Aries would maybe like want to be out there and being very sporty and everything, but then oh, my socks don't feel right in my shoes. There's just going to be this extra little level of discomfort and things around things. It's going to be a little bit more of a personal experience in that way, and it's going to be hard to understand that that other people have those issues. I mean, I don't know. It's like it's very subjective, is how I would call it.
Yeah, I really feel like when Chiron is retrograde, and you guys remember, just here in October, just like 6 weeks from now, Eddington is coming back and doing just asteroids, including Chiron. So we'll be back to talk about this. But I find that Chiron retrograde, like the person is closer to the wound. Like they get it. They're like, oh, this is because typically I find with the Chiron that is direct, we go out and encounter the wound. Like outside circumstances are like, oh, this is where this came from for me. But the person with it retrograde, feels a little bit closer to the knowledge of this is how I got it, this is where it came from, and this is how it debilitates me or helps me.
Right. And so in that sense, I think, someone who's probably doing writing or journaling, or, there's, my sense is like there's projects you go into it so internally, and it becomes its own thing. And then what's beautiful about it, because it's Chiron and also because it's retrograde, is that you're building on something for later on. So one thing that I feel is so important to say with it is that before we found Chiron, Saturn carried a lot of these kind of characteristics. So if you look at the Saturn, in fact, when I was looking at it, I was like, I realized like how much of Saturn back in the day was, has its Chironic aspects. Because there was no one holding the space for those archetypes.
Right. Yeah. Saturn, God bless it, has been doing a lot.
I love Saturn, and Saturn is here to kick our butts.
Yeah, well, I'm like, so Saturn was in charge of Chiron, then it's like in charge of time, then we're also in charge of Aquarius by ourselves. I'm like, Saturn is a busy beetle, and you gotta have your life together.
Yeah, you do.
To do that.
And I think the hard part with Chiron sometimes, especially when it's retrograde, is this feeling like, oh, I'm nothing more than this.
Yeah.
And that's the hard part, is if one becomes super identified with it, if there are other planets that are poorly aspecting it or conjunct it, they can really bring quite a spotlight. And it's not, we don't live in a society where our wounds are supported unless you've been able to make something amazing out of them. But that is also like kind of the hard luck story, right? That's like kind of what we're also about as Americans in a sense here in the US. Like, we pull ourselves up by the bootstraps. So, it's one of those really interesting things. If you're willing to take the time and work with it, Chiron and Saturn are really going to reward you.
Yeah, I agree. So here's a question from the chat. What does a retrograde planet conjunct a non-retrograde planet give the retrograde? What effect does it give to that planet?
I kind of talked a little bit about earlier when I was talking about the larger planet. I think that's when when I read that question, I think I was reading it as being a larger retrograde planet. But the retrograde, I mean, again, so it comes back to it's, the subjective aspect. So I would say that whatever that retrograde planet is, it's going to be acting in a more subjective aspect. And again, if it's below the horizon, that's going to even strengthen it even more. The aspects who are going to be doing. But when you think about it, as if you kind of said it like when you're talking with your friends, like each of the planets in our chart are like people in our lives. I mean, I'm sorry, but if you look at your chart, every part of your chart is in your life going on. And so when you have those, so you might want to look around and say like, okay, so this retrograde planet I have is this type of planet. Who is it in my life who's playing that part? Because chances are you have someone playing that role. And it's someone who like maybe is needing a little bit more help, maybe needing a little bit more support, and it's showing you those ways in which that you can also, benefit from that as well.
Yeah, I absolutely love that, because I was having this experience, and you guys let me know if you've had this experience, but I have a Venus in Aries, and it's a lovely thing. I actually enjoy that. But I started attracting a lot of people to me who didn't know how to Aries. And I was enough that like I was very Venus in the way I delivered okay, where you have a right, damn it, you have a right to be, and it was just this wonderful cast of characters who kept kind of popping in. And it showed me a lot about myself and how that Venus, how I can use that to attract. I don't have to drag everything back to the lair and make it love me. You know what I mean? Like, so it became a really different experience.
It's so beautiful. I mean, that's when we start realizing how much our charts magnetize people. It's really incredible. Like how that, like if we aren't doing our work, we will bring someone in who plays that role for us.
Or you find yourself, I don't know about you, but do you find yourself in those spaces? When I was going through, when my progressed moon moved into a water sign, all of a sudden, all of these watery places or very humid places wanted me to come and speak.
Yep.
I was like, I guess this is what we're doing.
And we like our dry climate, don't we?
Yes, except for when I went to Arizona and I was like, whoa.
Yeah, there's a limit to it. Yeah.
Yeah, that was a whole different experience this year. I was like, oh, clearly this is not where I would like to be. Thank you very much. But it was fun. Awesome. I think, did we get all of them? I think we've gotten all of our questions. I think we did it.
We did. Let's see. Yeah, I think it's awesome. And then, if people are asking, want to have other further questions, I'm happy to answer. And again, yeah, some of it's like a little bit, it gets into reading territory because it gets so particular, but I also think it's just so wonderful. I'm excited by the questions that were presented, so thoughtful, and I love when it makes me go like, oh, I didn't think about that.
I know, me too. As I was like gathering the questions, I was like, and if I had encountered it maybe in a reading, I would have thought about it. But to have somebody go, here's what I've learned from the Academy and what does this mean? I'm like, wow, that is incredible to me.
Yeah, I think so too. That just shows you the quality of what you're putting out there and the quality of the students who are showing up, and that brava.
Brava for the squad. Okay. Can you remind everybody or tell them if it's their first time here, your books? You've got some books.
Yes, I do. I have Astro Theater, which is a revolutionary approach to the ancient art of astrology. It's a visual, so it shows an image for each planet and sign, also shows the stages or the houses. It basically is the planets as an actor, the costumes are the signs, and the stages are the houses. And so it's a really nice way to kind of get a beginning understanding of astrology. And also, I think we have such a thing with words. It's so nice to have visuals to get beyond our words, so we don't have to think about it because, images give us like 1,000 words. And then the other book is Astrological Mavericks. Do you have what it takes to change the world? And that is for people who have planets on the angle, like Miss Stormy, who are here to make big changes on the planet and make things happen. And it's just, when you have a planet on an angle, it's just makes a huge difference. So the book is really a bunch of examples of people we've known throughout history who have those placements, what they've done with it, so that if you have those placements, or if you even have those planets and those signs, you can go like, oh, this is what someone did with it. I can see that, and I can do that better.
I know that I will tell you guys, as a person who's mavericking, I do think that I'm like, I don't necessarily need to do anything new. I just want to make that better or that clearer or that more.
Exactly.
Absolutely fantastic. Well, you guys, I'm going to make sure that the links to Kepler, to Michael's books are all below this video, so you can click down there. If you haven't fully checked out both of his classes, check them out. I'll make sure the links are there, and go check out all of the other great work that Michael's putting out as well. And Michael, thank you again for year one. Thank you for coming back for year two. Like, we didn't make you crazy. You didn't run off.
Why would I? I saw like what you were doing, and I thought it was just an excellent idea. And it's so exciting to still see it's going on. And I just love what you're making happen. Bless you, bless you, bless you. I'm so excited to see you at ESAR and finally get a hug in person. And anyone else out there, hopefully we'll see you at ESAR. I'll be at the Kepler booth and blabbing away, and it should be fun.
It'll be a good time and be more astro. All right, you guys, we are going to wrap up for today. But at the end of this session, when you watch the video back, there's always links to the different videos you can go check out. So go see what's coming up next. I love you all. And